Racist white cop burns a black woman alive in the woods. Unaware she's the new sheriff, they thought she was just another nameless black woman, a pawn discarded from the board of power. But when the wildfire dies out and no body is found, the entire town of Brier Hollow will have to confront a horrifying truth. They tried to burn the most dangerous woman the system ever attempted to bury. Before we dive into this story, tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. That night, September 14th, at approximately 2:16 a.m., a 2009 Ford F-250 pickup truck, missing its front license plate, pulled over on the edge of an old dirt road leading into the western woods. Inside the rotting cabin, which used to be a Civil War-era weapons storehouse, 3 men in baseball caps stepped out. Riley Kemp, sheriff's lieutenant, Brett Malone, investigative officer, and Colt Reeves, a rookie patrolman just 8 months into the force. In the darkness, they dragged out a woman, hands bound, clothes torn, face swollen and bruised. No one knew her name and they didn't bother to ask. They threw her onto the rotting wooden floor, switched on phone flashlights, and started recording. "You want to be sheriff here?" Riley snarled. "We'll send you back to the fire." Brett chuckled low and cruel, while Colt stood frozen, hands trembling. They doused the woman's body in gasoline, the chemical stench filling the room. And in what seemed like a twisted joke, Riley dropped a lit match. Flames roared to life, a live burning ritual, a warning sent to anyone daring to cross the color line in this town. But what they didn't know was that this woman wasn't ordinary. Her name was Imelda Brooks, 42 years old, newly appointed by the state of Georgia as the sheriff of Brier Hollow, replacing her corrupt predecessor who had been removed from office. Before wearing the badge, Imelda was a Navy Special Forces lieutenant with 3 deployments to the Middle East. She once led a team that rescued 11 hostages in Kandahar in 2011, a mission publicly commended by the Pentagon. She had survived a helicopter crash in the Nigerian jungle, gone 3 days without water, and carried 6 bullets in her body to this day. Imelda did not die. She woke up in searing pain, face scorched, lips bloodied, left arm numb. In the flaming cabin, she spotted a hole beneath the wooden floor, a decaying section of the basement, unnoticed by the officers. She slipped through it, dropping into thick darkness reeking of mold and gasoline, and began scraping at the metal cuffs with her nails, bending them against cracks in the cement. She didn't scream. She only breathed, slowly, and survived. 9 hours passed. The sun had just begun to rise. In a wooden house 3 miles away, Elias Lewis, 63 years old, a retired firefighter, caught a strange scent in the wind, the smell of burning flesh. Growing up in the South, he knew that smell from lynchings back in 1967. Instinct pulled him back, though no one had called. He entered the woods, followed the trail of dying smoke, and found the cabin reduced to ashes. That's when he heard the rasping breath beneath the shattered beams. Pulled from the basement was a mangled body, burned over 38% of her skin, one side of her face charred black, one hand still half-cuffed. But her eyes were open. Imelda looked straight at Elias, as if the world still owed her a war, and she had no intention of surrendering. They thought they had killed her. But what they did was ignite a reason for the whole town to burn, not with gasoline, but with the truth. Brier Hollow is the kind of place where the painting in front of City Hall reads, "Freedom, faith, family." The American flag flaps proudly each morning. Flower beds are trimmed into perfect squares, and every wooden lamppost is repainted quarterly. American Living magazine once named it one of the 10 most livable towns in the South in 2016. But beneath the ivory coat of paint are cracks steeped in the scent of dried blood, where history isn't taught in schools, but whispered in courthouse hallways, church corridors, and breakfast diners filled with pancakes and slogans like, "God bless America." The Rotary Club group photo hanging in the public reception room is a living witness. 112 white men with salt and pepper hair and pale gray suits. One single black man, Mr. George Sims, a retired postal worker, stands at the end of the row, faded like a shadow. His name was misprinted on the photo frame for 7 years. George Simmons. No one ever corrected it. The Central Police Department, with its 47 officers, has never hired a single black female officer in the 63 years since its founding. Brier Hollow High School has 1,284 students, 17% of whom are people of color, yet the basketball team, the debate club, and the student council are all led by the children of town officials, mostly white. Even in church, seating isn't divided by ropes or paper, but by glances. Black people often choose to sit in the back, not because of the law, but because of memory. 2 weeks before she was burned alive, Imelda had walked through this square simply to survey potential spots for placing security cameras. She felt the cold beneath the townspeople's polite smiles, nods just sufficient, glances that slid past her as if she were a ghost that had wandered into a land already boxed in. A black woman in a suit with a notebook made Brier Hollow more uneasy than a man holding a gun. And in that suffocating silence, there was only one person who saw the whole picture. Otis Carter, 52, the administrative clerk at City Hall. Otis wasn't tall, wasn't flashy, but he survived in the system with one simple weapon: observation. For 10 years, he had quietly backed up every document ordered to be deleted. Missing persons reports stamped "voluntarily left the area," emergency pleas that were never processed, audio files from the hotline removed from the system. Otis used encryption software installed by a nephew working in IT in Atlanta, saved everything onto small drives, and hid them in empty cereal boxes in the basement storage room. He once told Imelda, "This town has 2 sets of records. One is what they show the world, and the other is the truth locked away in silence." In the past 3 years, 17 black women have gone missing, ranging in age from 14 to 43. They all lived around Housing District 4, near the old railway line, where streetlights always flickered, and police rarely patrolled after 9 p.m. Not a single article was written. Not one community meeting was held. When a woman named Kendra Jules went missing, people said she had a record, probably ran off. When a 16-year-old girl named Imani disappeared on her way to school, the newspaper printed a single short line: "Teen may have left home due to family conflict." Imelda read every file Otis sent, not through email, not via USB, but on real paper, hidden in envelopes labeled "Third Quarter Environmental Sanitation Report." She read them at night, while her burn wound still oozed, and her silent tears fell onto each page. Family photos, report cards, diaries, each once a living person, now reduced to data. Brier Hollow prides itself on being a town with no serious crime in 15 years. But in truth, it is not lacking in crime, only in those allowed to name it. And from that moment on, Imelda knew. She would no longer be a sheriff sent to maintain order. She would be the one to strip away each layer of white paint, exposing the decaying face behind this award-winning, safe town. Because there is no place more dangerous than one that knows how to bury the truth beneath a flawless surface. Imelda didn't go home. She didn't call her superiors. She didn't reach out to the press or the FBI. Instead, she chose to disappear into the very place where everything had once been hidden from the light. An abandoned medical outpost on the southern edge of Brier Hollow's forest. The outpost had once been the only place where black people could receive treatment in the 1930s, but it had been shut down in 1982 after a mysterious fire that never received an official explanation. Elias, with the calloused hands of a firefighter, cleaned out each rotting room for her. Inside the peeling walls, where old blood had once seeped into wooden floors, Imelda began an unofficial investigation, a hunt for the truth by a woman who had been burned alive and survived. On the metal table once used for emergency surgeries, she spread out satellite maps, local maps, and even an old layout of the forest from back when it was owned by the Westvale Lumber Company. From the files Otis had secretly delivered, she marked the locations where 17 black women had disappeared over the past 3 years. As the red dots appeared, a chilling pattern made her shudder. 8 of the disappearances were within a precise 2-mile radius of the cabin where she had been set on fire. That could not be a coincidence. She circled the area with a red marker, connected the points, and gradually formed a warped hexagon, resembling symbols used in ancient rituals, a kind of spatial trap. Each point was a link, and the cabin sat at the very center, the heart of a deadly web. She searched her memory, recalling a training session from 2013 during her time in the Domestic Counterterrorism Unit, where she was briefed on covert extremist groups. One name had been mentioned briefly, Clavis Obscura, translated roughly as the Key of Shadows, a splinter sect from the clan that worshipped pure-blooded dominance and carried out assassinations through ritual. And then she saw it, carved into the trunk of an old oak, just 38 steps from the cabin, was a strange symbol, an eagle's claw gripping a broken cross. Next to it were 3 red slashes, resembling claw marks from a wild animal. But Imelda knew better. It was a mark signaling a completed ritual execution. These symbols weren't part of traditional clan iconography, but came from a darker stratum, where killing wasn't just to silence, but to purify the soil of tainted blood, according to their twisted gospel. She used her camera to document every mark, every angle of the forest. But when she checked the camera mounted at the tree base near the cabin, a device Elias had installed earlier to monitor wildlife, she found it had been damaged. However, the memory card was still intact. She brought it back, recovered the data, and at minute 11 of the 23-minute footage, an image appeared. A tall man in a brown baseball cap, shifty-eyed, shoulders hunched. Colt Reeves. He looked around, trembling, but didn't touch the camera. In the following seconds, another figure entered the frame. Riley Kemp. He didn't shy away. On the contrary, he looked directly into the lens. His lips curled into a cold smile. He tilted his head, as if sending a greeting to Imelda herself, or to anyone bold enough to view the footage. Riley knew the camera was there, and he let it record, because he believed no one would dare confront the truth. Imelda felt it clearly. This was no longer a case of rogue police misconduct. This was a ritual, systematic, intricately planned, and shielded by a network from above. And that cabin, it wasn't the place where she almost died. It was the origin point of a black gateway, where justice had been burned, along with women like her. From within what was once a hospital for healing the forgotten, Imelda had drawn a map for a war no one else dared to chart. But this time, she wasn't mapping an escape. She was mapping her return. At exactly 3:02 a.m., Imelda Brooks, her body still carrying the scent of burned skin, put on a dark-colored coat and stepped silently into the dense western forest of Brier Hollow. No one accompanied her, no weapons, no backup. Only a small device, a camera tucked beneath her shirt, resting on her chest, no bigger than a coin. It was a military-grade recording tool once used by Special Operations recon units, capable of withstanding heat up to 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit and recording sound through background noise. This camera is activated only with a voice-triggered code. Imelda had carefully chosen the phrase in advance. "If I don't return, let the truth speak for me." And as she crossed the threshold of the forest, that voice command was spoken. The rotting cabin, once her fiery prison, emerged from the shadows. Imelda walked slowly around the site, recording every trace of gasoline left on the dirt floor, every drag mark bearing shoe prints sized 12 and 10, a half-burnt Marlboro Red beneath the tree canopy, and even the tracks of a Ford 4x4 still imprinted in damp soil. She reattached a light sensor at the window, fixed a wireless mic to a nearby branch. It all took only 4 minutes and 27 seconds. But just as she was about to withdraw, the sound of tires crunching dry leaves echoed from afar. Headlights pierced through the forest. No time to hide. She turned, standing in the darkness. And then, 3 figures stepped out of the truck. Riley Kemp leading, Brett Malone following with a high-powered flashlight, and Colt Reeves, still quiet as a ghost with a fractured conscience. "So we meet again," Riley said, his voice cold as steel. "I thought you were roasted to ash." They needed no reason. No warrant. Her mere existence was a threat enough. Imelda was slammed to the ground with a punch to the jaw. Brett snatched her phone, while Colt, the same man who once trembled on camera, now pulled the zip ties tight around her wrists. The camera beneath her shirt was kicked hard, rolling across the cabin floor. But it didn't break. It kept recording. Riley poured gasoline across the floorboards, each step like drawing a ritual circle. "Burning her is faster than filing a report," he muttered, then struck a small wooden match, the old kind used for wood stoves. Brett chuckled. Colt looked away. Imelda, though blood oozed from her mouth, lifted her head. She did not plead. She did not tremble. She spoke, voice hoarse but clear. "My name is Imelda Brooks. I am the sheriff appointed by the state of Georgia, and you have just burned alive a sworn law enforcement officer." A moment of silence fell. Colt froze. Brett glanced at Riley. "You think anyone's going to believe that?" Riley smirked. "You're nobody now." He tossed the match. The flames caught the trail of gasoline and rose faster than buried rage. The cabin turned into hell once more. Beneath the ash, the camera still recorded. It captured Riley grinning, fire dancing across his face like the mask of a demon. His voice echoed through the smoke. "Not worthy of being human." They left as they had before, letting the fire do the rest. But this time, they didn't know. The camera didn't just capture a murder. It logged every sound, every flicker of light, the precise time, GPS location, and the clear faces of each man, saved in an encrypted memory system that would auto-transmit once connected to a network. Imelda never planned to die again. But if she did, this time, justice would live in her place. And the fire they thought had silenced her would be the very thing that burned down their careers, their reputations, and the rotten system they clung to. Imelda awoke to the scent of gauze, iodine, and menthol oil. Dim light filtered through the dusty glass pane of the room that had once been a medical supply storage closet, now turned into a makeshift recovery ward for someone the world never expected to survive. She could barely move. Her body burned with second-degree injuries across her arms, shoulders, and lower back. Her lips cracked, skin peeling like sun-scorched bark. But her eyes remained open, and her spirit, that one thing her enemies couldn't douse in gasoline, now burned brighter than ever. The woman sitting at her bedside was Mrs. Dolores Lewis, Elias's mother. Now 87 years old, she had once been a nurse at the Brier Hollow Colored Health Clinic during the Jim Crow era. This very place had been where she worked, abandoned for nearly 40 years. Her slender, yet steady hands, applied balm to each burn, as if stitching back together her memories. "You didn't survive for no reason," she whispered. "God didn't leave you here to forgive. He left you to finish this." Imelda looked at her, saying nothing. Her tears fell not from pain, but from understanding. This resurrection was no miracle. It was a calling. That night, as the clinic sank into the darkness of the old forest, a faint knock sounded at the rear entrance. 3 short taps, 2 long. The door cracked open, and Otis Carter stepped inside. His shirt wrinkled, glasses dusty, arms wrapped around a worn canvas bag. He said no greetings, offered no condolences. He simply placed the bag on the metal table beside Imelda and said, "I didn't keep these to fight anyone. I kept them because someday, someone strong enough to use them would survive." Inside the bag was a triple encrypted 2-terabyte hard drive, holding things that were never meant to exist, but were the only evidence left of the truth. Over 400 files, 63 hotline recordings the police never answered, 112 crime scene photos omitted from reports, GPS logs of patrol vehicles the nights 17 women vanished, and most critically, the full personal files, photos, witness statements, and legal records of those 17 victims, all deleted from the official system. Among them, a teenage girl named Brenda Holtz, missing since 2021, whose mother's search request had been lost the same day she visited the police station. With trembling hands, Imelda reached for the keyboard of an old laptop. The files appeared, labeled "Official Redacted, Internal Use Only." She opened each satellite map, cross-referencing it with police patrol routes, the dead zones, places where security cameras had randomly lost signal, lined up with the disappearances. The areas off-limits for repairs were where cabins, sheds, and forest clearings had been erased. She printed each map using a solar-powered mobile printer, every page a piece of evidence. Every burn on her body was a blood oath that no one would be forgotten. Elias, acting as the invisible courier, drove his truck into the poor southern neighborhoods, delivering copies of the files into the hands of 3 black pastors, an elementary school teacher, and a former soldier, all people who had lost loved ones under suspicious circumstances. They hadn't been believed by the system, but now they had something no one else did, the truth on paper, and a living face to stand for it. Imelda worked for 19 straight hours during each of the first 3 days. She mounted a giant board in the old logistics room, numbering every disappearance, color-coding categories: red for victims, blue for confirmed police presence, yellow for signal blackout zones. The thread stretched from the cabin's center like a web, and hanging at the heart of the board, scrawled in black ink, was a single line: "They tried to burn me like evidence, but I'll burn down the whole system as my testimony." From the ashes, she wasn't just reborn. She was turning every scar on her body into kindling for justice's uprising. On October 22nd, Brier Hollow dressed itself in its most radiant colors of the year. It was the day of the traditional fall festival, when thousands of people from neighboring areas poured into the town center to watch the parade, sample the local church's famous baked apples, and listen to the choir perform "God Bless America" on the main stage. Beneath the pumpkin decorations and crimson leaves was a town asleep, believing the truth still lay deep in the woods, burned with some rotting cabin. But that day, the truth climbed onto the stage, literally. Otis Carter, acting as a volunteer technician, had been assigned to coordinate the lighting system and run the 20-foot-wide LED screen set in the middle of the square. No one paid attention to the graying black man fumbling with a tiny USB stick at the back of the video transmitter. Even fewer knew that the drive contained a 4-minute, 16-second video, encrypted, edited, and set to trigger with a single Bluetooth signal from the old phone in Otis's pocket. 7:07 p.m. The youth choir had just finished their hymn. Applause still echoed when the main screen, originally set to display the logo Brier Hollow, Southern Pride, went dark. 1 second later, the image of a burning cabin appeared. The first sound broke through like thunder in the peaceful autumn air. "Burn it!" Riley Kemp's voice rang out. The crowd fell silent. The video clearly showed his face, Brett Malone beside him, and Colt Reeves stepping back in the background. Then the camera panned quickly across the flames. Imelda Brooks, tied up, scorched, her voice hoarse but distinct. "I am the state-appointed sheriff of Georgia." The cabin collapsed. Fire consumed the screen. Then everything went black. A dead stillness took over. And then, a different light came on. Not from the screen, but from within the crowd. Imelda stepped up from the side stairwell of the stage. She wasn't in uniform, just a dark leather jacket, her right arm still wrapped in white gauze. Her cropped hair revealed burn scars along her neck, but what made thousands follow her with their eyes was not her wounds, it was her gaze, clear, unflinching, and unbowed. She needed no microphone, no speech. Imelda simply raised her left hand, and in her palm, something caught the light. A scorched badge, its blue paint faded, one corner melted, but still legible. "Sheriff, State of Georgia." Her voice cut through the night like a blade. "I am Sheriff Imelda Brooks. I didn't come for revenge. I came to ignite what you've denied for far too long. The truth." She stepped down from the stage immediately after. No bow, no glance around for allies. She needed no applause. And indeed, not a single person in the crowd of over 3,000 clapped. They stood. They bowed their heads. Some wept. Some covered their faces. A little girl clutched her mother's hand and asked softly, "Mom, why did they burn her?" No one could answer. But everyone knew. From that moment on, Brier Hollow would no longer be a town sung about in patriotic ballads. It would be a place forced to confront the hardest question in any society. Who was allowed to decide who gets to disappear? And Imelda, the woman once set aflame, now walked not as a victim, but as a mirror held up to every familiar face, not to reclaim her life, but to force an entire town to witness its conscience laid bare. 3 days after the Fall Festival, an 87-page file folder, along with a USB drive, was delivered to the office of Federal Agent Claire Saunders at the Atlanta Regional FBI headquarters. There was no sender, only a handwritten note. "I survived. They are killing people. Start here." Claire, 38, who had cracked 2 federal police corruption cases and led the investigation into the 2019 Baton Rouge mass disappearance, immediately inserted the USB into a secured internal computer. What she heard was a blow to every boundary of law and morality. Riley Kemp's voice, deep and calm. "Take her out. It's just an old cabin. No one will suspect anything." Mayor Harold Wilkes's voice, clearer, weary. "Are you sure?" "I mean, she's the state sheriff, Harold. Riley. She's nothing now. Burn it. File her as missing. End of story." Claire sat upright. She ordered a sweep of the system and uncovered 12 complaints about missing black women in Brier Hollow that had been submitted through internal FBI channels, but flagged as unsubstantiated. 4 anonymous calls to the FBI tip line had also been blocked at the regional server level, meaning someone inside the system had intervened to prevent the case from being investigated. Without hesitation, Claire filed for an emergency arrest warrant. Within 24 hours, the FBI descended on Brier Hollow with full federal authority. Riley Kemp and Brett Malone were arrested at their homes. No local officer dared interfere. Mayor Harold Wilkes was handcuffed right in the town hall during a meeting with forest land investors. His face went pale at the sight of the FBI badge. But Wilkes wasn't just a cowardly official. He knew how to operate in the shadows. Detained at the Federal Holding Center in Atlanta, he made a call through the internal line, an 11-second message to a man named Conrad Healy, the town's records archive specialist. The content was simple. Vault 3, second basement. Burn it all. Tonight. That night, while attention remained fixed on the federal headquarters, a man in a painter's mask slipped into the town hall through a back tunnel. He carried a gasoline can, an old Zippo lighter, and a bag full of flammable materials. His target. The underground classified records room, where internal evidence that Otis and Imelda hadn't yet extracted was stored. The fire ignited at 2:13 a.m., with the alarm system disabled. But neither Conrad nor Wilkes knew one thing. A micro camera had been installed in the ceiling by a black janitor named Cora Jameson, whose son Imelda had once rescued from a wrongful arrest. Cora had quietly installed the camera 3 weeks earlier after noticing late-night intrusions into the storage room. The camera was motion-activated, programmed to upload footage to the cloud when triggered. The next morning, Claire received an alert. The footage was crystal clear. Conrad Healy lighting the fire, pulling out a stack of files, and tossing them into the incinerator. One corner of the image clearly showed the label, Evidence, Sealed 2019, Missing Persons. Claire stood in her office as she watched the video. The breeze from the window brushed her shirt sleeve. She said nothing. She simply picked up the phone and dialed. Prepare for federal prosecution. We have organized crime, destruction of evidence, and conspiracy to commit federal homicide. Her voice was ice cold. An hour later, Wilkes was transferred from protective custody to an isolated no-contact cell. No phone, no lawyer. Riley and Brett were taken to federal court, where a 38-page indictment awaited. And Imelda, she stood in the shadows behind the screen, watching the men who once threw her into fire now tremble under the white lights of justice. The truth no longer breathed only through the survivor's lungs. It had begun to stand on its own, and it was dragging down those who once thought themselves untouchable into the heart of the light. For a long time, the name Raymond Whitmore was considered untouchable in Southern legal circles. Over 27 years as Chief Justice of the Clayton County Superior Court, he presided over more than 5,200 cases, none of which had ever been successfully appealed. Every sentence he issued was treated as truth carved in stone. With his flowing silver hair, immaculately pressed black robe, and deep, commanding voice, Whitmore was the embodiment of power, at least to the wealthy and white. But Imelda knew his true face, and the FBI, after nearly a month of digging through records, finally found the first shovel, thanks to a newly hired clerk. Jerome Mason, 23 black, had been working in Whitmore's office for 4 months. One evening, while sorting archived files, he happened to overhear a conversation leaking through the divider from the judge's office. Not everyone would have had the courage to do what Jerome did, slip his phone into his shirt pocket and record for 11 minutes as Whitmore spoke with a man named Robert Langston, a contractor previously appointed by the state to renovate the Brier Hollow courthouse. Whitmore's voice, deep but sharp, "I want that contract." $7 million, not a cent less. The other man asked, "And what about Imelda Brooks?" Whitmore replied coldly, "Erase the file. Sign off on removing her from the list. Reason: post-war psychological instability, as easy as snapping a matchstick." The recording was handed directly to Agent Claire Saunders at the Atlanta FBI office on November 2nd. Within less than 36 hours, an emergency judicial suspension order under the Federal Civil Rights Act was issued, bearing a direct signature from the U.S. Department of Justice. This was only the 7th time in the past 40 years that a senior judge had been suspended mid-term for suspected judicial manipulation and corruption. On November 4th, at exactly 9:42 a.m., Claire and 4 federal agents entered the courtroom where Whitmore was presiding over a Class C theft case. Outside stood a crowd, including black citizens who had once been wrongfully sentenced by him in trials with no legal counsel, no solid evidence, like Mrs. Rosa Manning, who had spent 18 months in jail simply for assaulting an officer when she protested the unlawful arrest of her son. When Claire held the suspension order up to the judicial panel, the room fell silent, as if all the air had been sucked out. Whitmore read the document, his face stiff, but his hand remained calm, as if nothing unusual were happening. He stood, removed his robe slowly, like a ritual of old. But in the back row, a small action thundered. Black citizens began rising, one by one. No shouting, no protest. They simply stood. And then, someone began to clap. Slowly, steadily, like the heartbeat they had long kept quiet in their chests. Whitmore stepped down from the bench, escorted through the center of the courtroom. As he neared Imelda, who sat in the front row, her arms still bandaged, he glared at her with rage, with hatred, as if still clinging to the power to pass judgment. But Imelda did not rise. She did not speak. She simply looked him in the eye, like a mirror reflecting everything he had ever denied, the fear of a man who knows he's been stripped bare. That silence, colder than any verdict, heavier than any handcuffs. That day, headlines read, "Judge topples under the law he once twisted." But for those present in the courtroom, they knew. He didn't fall because of the FBI. He fell because for the first time, black people did not bow to a counterfeit justice system. And Imelda, the woman once burned alive, now stood witness as the very stone pillars built by racial injustice cracked at their roots. There was no marching band, no fireworks, no rows of honorary seats reserved for senators or state governors. The official swearing-in ceremony of Imelda Brooks, the first black woman to become the legitimate sheriff of Brier Hollow in 147 years, took place on a makeshift wooden platform built from old planks salvaged from the Baptist church's abandoned storage shed. Overhead, there was no waving flag, only the wide canopy of an old oak tree that locals called the memory root, once used to hang a bell calling slaves back for lunch, and also once a place where black mothers hid with their children to escape police raids. In that small square, on a late November afternoon, more than 700 people gathered, not for the event, but for the truth. They didn't carry flags. They carried photographs, pictures of mothers, sisters, daughters, wives, and friends, people who had gone missing over the past 10 years, with no one ever asking the right questions. Imelda stepped onto the platform in a black suit with no badge, her right hand still scarred and bandaged from the burns. Beside her stood Otis Carter, the quiet clerk who guarded records as if guarding life, holding his mother's old Bible, passed down through generations from ancestors who had been slaves to the civil rights era. Imelda placed her hand on the worn leather cover and looked down at the crowd. Her voice wasn't loud, but each word sliced through the wind. "I, Imelda Brooks, swear not to serve power, but to serve life. I swear to protect the unseen, hear the unheard, and not stay silent in the face of evil, even when it wears the same uniform as mine." There was no applause, only the soft wind, the rustle of photo paper printed in fading ink, and the deep inhale of those who had long been afraid to hope. At that moment, a little girl, no one knew from where, ran up to the platform. In her hand was a crumpled photograph. Imelda bent down. In the photo was a woman in a nurse's uniform, smiling brightly. The girl said, This is my mom. She went missing when I was 3. They said she left on her own. But she didn't leave me. Imelda didn't ask for her name, didn't ask anything. She knelt, hugged the girl tightly, and whispered through tears, "You won't have to be afraid to call the police anymore." That sentence wasn't a promise. It was a vow, spoken by someone who had once been burned alive by the very system she served, and who returned to rebuild it brick by brick. Below, mothers gripped their children's hands tightly. Fathers who had been jailed for crimes they never committed bowed their heads. A group of white college students stood quietly in the square, hands over their hearts, not for the national anthem, but for humanity. No one smiled, but hundreds wept. An old man in the back, dressed in a worn Korean War veteran's jacket, murmured as if to himself, "For the first time in my life, I've seen a swearing-in ceremony that wasn't about holding office, but about keeping a vow." And so it was. On that day, Imelda didn't rise to a throne. She stepped into a bleeding wound, not to patch it up and move on, but to cut it open for the truth, so everyone could witness it and carry the responsibility together. Because real justice doesn't need a flag, doesn't need an anthem. It only needs someone brave enough to look into pain and not look away. 2 months after her inauguration, on a still January morning as cold as steel, the Brier Hollow Police Department reopened. There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no swarming press, just the creaking of an old iron door swinging open and a new bronze plaque mounted above the porch. Serving justice, not tradition, since 2023. Imelda walked in, wearing no gun, no handcuffs. On her chest was only the scorched badge from her survival in the burning cabin, now enclosed in a small glass frame, worn as a reminder, not a boast. Her first step wasn't to issue commands, but to rebuild people. In an unprecedented move for southern Georgia, Imelda organized a public recruitment event, inviting applicants of all races, genders, and backgrounds. More than 320 people applied, from Black veterans and Latin Americans who had once faced police discrimination, to a white officer named Lucas Hardin, who had once signed a petition against her, but resigned from another department after the incident and asked to start over. Imelda didn't ask them about their past. She only asked one question. "Are you willing to listen when someone screams that you are the problem?" In the first training class, Imelda didn't start with tactical skills or legal codes. She picked up a piece of chalk and wrote in large letters on the whiteboard, "A badge is not power. It is a responsibility to those weaker than you." Beneath that line, she asked each trainee to write a personal oath, not from a template. And when they read them aloud, the room was no longer a place to train police. It became a place to learn how to be human. Elias Lewis, the man who once saved her from the burning cabin, was invited to serve as an in-house psychological advisor. He launched a program called Decompressing the Silence for officers who had witnessed injustice but never dared speak up. Otis Carter, the clerk who once hid files in fear, was now Director of Community Communications, hosting weekly citizen forums to hear complaints. No middlemen, no red tape. And then, on a foggy Tuesday morning, an elderly man, Earl Jennings, 76 years old, came to the station with trembling hands. He had once been among the 59 residents who signed a petition opposing Imelda's appointment because she did not align with the town's traditional values. Earl didn't offer an apology. He simply placed a letter on the desk. "I want to volunteer." Not because I was right, but because I now know I was wrong. Imelda looked at him, her eyes dry, but her heart stirred. She nodded. "Good. We'll start from there." At that very moment, over 800 miles away in Washington, D.C., a new bill was being read for the first time on the floor of Congress. The Imelda Act, Proposed by a bipartisan group of 6 senators, the bill protected the rights of police officers who dared to blow the whistle from within, shielding them from threats, retaliation, and isolation. It also required the creation of an independent office in each state to investigate police misconduct outside the reach of local departments. For the first time, a name that didn't come from the Capitol, didn't carry a political dynasty, didn't grow up in the Ivy League, but rose from the ashes of a burned-down cabin, was spoken amid the thunderous applause of Congress. And when someone asked her after the reopening ceremony at the station, "Do you believe justice has arrived?" Imelda simply smiled and replied, "Justice hasn't arrived, but now it knows the way." In everyone's eyes, the fire that once tried to kill her had failed to consume her body. But more importantly, it hadn't burned away her faith. Because justice, once stripped of its slogans, becomes a plan. And Imelda Brooks, the woman they once tried to burn, was now the one leading it forward. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.